Hi everyone, great to have you here and thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to start the Product Leader series, a set of curated conversations with practitioners who are shaping how modern products are built. Before we get started, you can submit your questions. Maybe Dan, you want to pop up that slider on the screen?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I think for just scan the QR code, you should be able to submit your questions. I think after Dan speaks, we can take some questions depending on the time.
Yeah. And I'll put the link in chat too. There's a
Okay,
chat I think people should be able to access perhaps. Um,
fantastic. And we can leave the QR code slide on for some time.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
And
cool.
I'll put it back up again at the end too. It's all good, yeah.
Sounds
Yeah.
great. All right. I'm Pragati. I'm partner and director at Nagarro. Today we have Hugo, product leader at Nagarro, co-hosting this episode, and really excited, start with this first episode in the series. The whole intent to start this series is really simple: create a space for honest, practical conversations about what actually works. Because as pace of building software accelerates, especially with AI, the need for strong product thinking becomes even more important. Before we jump into today's topic, a quick intro about Nagarro for folks who are joining outside of Nagarro. We're a global digital engineering and technology services company working with some of the largest enterprises across the world. A big part of how we are approaching AI transformation is through what we call fluidic intelligence, blending human expertise with AI to improve how organizations operate, adapt, and deliver. By connecting data, processes, and people, it helps remove friction and unlock measurable outcomes. Often, I think this leads to productivity gains and improvements of up to 20%. At least that's what we are trying to aim, and we are seeing results there as well. What we are seeing is that the real opportunity with AI is not just adoption, but embedding intelligence into how work actually happens. And we see this every day, even within our teams, how the teams are able to adapt AI to accelerate most of the work. So that's that's the that brings us to today's session and our guest speaker, Dan Olsen. Dan is a product leader and author of the Lean Product Playbook. It became essential reading for product teams across the globe, used by thousands of companies to think about product market fit and product strategy. His work brings a clear, structured approach to building products customers truly love, something that becomes even more critical as the pace of building increases. Today, he will share his perspectives on what it takes to create successful products. Now, Dan, over to you. I'm sure there is a lot more to talk about what you do these days. Why don't start with if I missed the important details, just tell the
Sounds
audience
great.
what you do these days apart from.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me here, Pragati and Hugo. And thanks to Nagarro for hosting. This is great. I'm glad to see we have so many people on today. Thank you. And I'm excited because most of my talks are usually like US friendly time. So I'm glad that we have an India and Asia friendly time tonight. So welcome, everybody. There is chat. If you want to put in the chat where you're are joining us today, that would be awesome. I think everybody should be able to do it, but in the bottom right, you should see a little chat thing. But anyway, yeah, I'm excited to share some advice on how to create successful products from, oh, there's public chat. There we go. There we go, public chat. There we go, cool. I'm going to type in the Slido again in the public chat. I guess there's different chats. There's that, and then the code is enter code. Hey, thanks, Nehal. Good to see you. He's from Pune. All right, cool. There we go. Delhi, Bangalore. All right, we got the big cities coming in. All right, good, excellent, sweet. Welcome, everybody. Thanks. So, yeah, I'm excited to share some advice on how to create successful products today. At the very top of that chat, if you go back, it'll have the Slido link with the code to put in there as well. So, and I'll share it up there again. But yeah, real quick, thanks for the intro. Basically, real quick, so you know more about where I came from. I started out with technical background. I coded since I was a kid. My first job out of college was actually submarine design. Then I moved out here to Silicon Valley, where I live, where I'm joining you from today. I've been out here ever since to go to business school at Stanford. And when I was at business school at Stanford, trying to figure out what I wanted to do after graduation, I learned about this new emerging career called product management. And the more I learned about it, the more exciting it sounded. So I asked people, where's the best place to learn how to do product management since I had never done it? And they said Intuit. And so I was very fortunate to get a job at Intuit. And I learned a lot about product management there. After Intuit, I went to be a product leader at startups. I stumbled into becoming like an interim VP of product for startups, which was a lot of fun consulting and then speaking. And that led to my book, The Lean Product Playbook, where I shared my best practices on how to create successful products. So I'm going to share some highlights from my book with you today. We only have about 45 minutes, so I can only hit a certain key points, but I'm going to try to hit the most important points. And I'm also a big believer in community, so I created a community 14 years ago called Lean Product Meetup, and that's my website. So again, I'll hold this up for 1 sec since everybody's in here now. If you want to, you can put your phone up to the QR code. That way you can look at the Slido on your phone while you're still looking at your computer screen, or you can go to that URL, slido.com, and put in that number code that's there. I'll put the code in again. Somebody's asking. It's the very top. We have so many people said hello that it's at the very top. It got buried. So there's that link, and the code is 6212239. You can take a picture of the slide also if you want. All right, going once, going twice. All right, cool. So I want to talk with you today about building new products. Basically, most new products fail. And I want to tell a story about a product that I worked on. I'll let you decide if it failed or not. But basically, we knew, hey, if you want to be successful, you got to get out of the building and talk to customers. So we went out to the building, we talked to customers and asked them to describe what they wanted. And here's how they described what they wanted to us. The team came away with slightly different view. They had their own vision of what the customer really wanted. And so we started working on towards our alpha milestone. We got to the alpha version. There were some problems that didn't work as expected, unfortunately, but we totally pivoted, iterated the beta version. We fixed the problems. It was all good. We, of course, work with our engineering partners to come up with the schedule and the launch dates. Unfortunately, we did not hit our launch date. That was the only thing that was ready by the original launch date. As we approached launch, the marketing team got involved, and there's how they advertised the product to the world. And then after we launched, sales team got involved, and here's how they sold the product to the world. And here's what the customer really wanted the whole time, right? So why do I share this little funny cartoon strip? It just kind of captures some of the challenges when you're trying to create value for customers, and they may not be the most articulate at the front end. You're trying to do discovery. They may not be the most articulate about their needs and preferences. Your team may have different ideas. You got to coordinate across cross-functional partners. And so hopefully, you can make sense of that all and work together as a team. What comes out actually does create customer value. But sadly, there are a lot of statistics and surveys out there that over 80% of new products fail. And just to be clear, it's the same thing for features. Over 80% of new features fail, right? So this is pretty common. And if it was easy, we wouldn't be here talking today about best practices, and I wouldn't have a book about it, right? And we wouldn't have so many startups that go out of business and products that fail. Even from successful companies, when they try to do a product, a lot of times it fails. And so I've been fortunate in my career to work on, hundreds of products in various capacities with clients and myself and other people. And so I've basically come up with the top 3 reasons why products fail in my experience. And the top 3 are: the first is because the team started with a solution, not a problem. The second is they didn't solve the right problem, right? And the third one is maybe they had the right problem, but they didn't prototype and test their idea, their solution to the problem. And so those are the top 3 reasons product fail. I'm going to try to hit all 3 of these in my talk today, because if you follow my advice today, you're going to increase your odds from 80% failure to really reduce that a lot. So if we flip these around, in order to have a successful product, what do we need to do? First, we need to start with a problem, not a solution. I'm going to talk a lot about that. Second, we want to make sure the problem that we solve is the most valuable one. It's going to create the most value for customers. And third, we want to prototype and test our idea. So I'm going to talk about those 3 things. And the key framework from my book is actually the product market fit pyramid. And obviously, different products are different, but this is kind of a generic framework that applies to all products at a meta level. And it kind of answers the questions: what do you need to get right enough in order to achieve product market fit or have a successful product? Right? And product market fit was a term that was coined by Mark Andreessen, who invented the Netscape browser and is now a famous venture capitalist. But he kind of just said, hey, when you have it, your servers are melting down. There was no real guide on how to achieve it. And again, my background's in engineering, so I like to have rigorous framework. So the product market fit is a pyramid. It has 5 layers. And like a real pyramid, the idea is each layer builds on the layers beneath it. The bottommost layer of the product market fit pyramid, the foundation, if you will, is a target customer. Everything starts with that. Who are we trying to create value for, right? We have to get really clear on who that person is. And then the next layer up is for that customer, what are their underserved needs? And there are two words there. There's needs, which again is synonymous with problems or benefits, right? Or pain points. We want to focus on those kind of things before we jump to features or solutions. And there's the word underserved, which is, if they have a bunch of different needs, some of which are well served, some of which are not well served, the ones that are not as well served are where their opportunities are going to live. If someone's already happy with how a need's getting met, it's not going to create a lot of value for them. So, but taken together, these two layers form the market part of product market fit, right? And if you look in an economics or marketing textbook, it'll say a market is a group of people that share a set of common needs. And you don't control them in the sense that they make their own purchase and usage decisions. You can decide who you want to target, but what's under your control are the three product layers. The first of which is your value proposition, right? This is basically, okay, what benefits are we going to promise to our customer that our product delivers for them? And how is it going to do so in a way that's better or different than the competition? This is where product strategy and differentiation live in this layer. The next layer up is your feature set or functionality. And the way I like to think about this is customers use the features in your product to enjoy the benefits that are in your value proposition. And this is where MVP, minimum viable product thinking, comes in so that we don't overscope our product before we go too far and confirm whether we're heading in the right direction or not. And then the final layer of the product market fit pyramid is user experience, UX for short. And the way I think about this is customers interact with your user experience to use your features to enjoy the benefits in your value proposition. And product market fit is just, hey, we've identified that we want to go after this market, right? This set of people with this set of needs. And we've made these decisions or assumptions or execution in the product space of value proposition, feature set, and UX. How well do the decisions we've made up top resonate with the market that we're going after down below? And you can think of it again, each of these five things doesn't have to be perfect, but you can think about the hypotheses that you need to get right enough in order to have a successful product or create product market fit. If any one of these layers is significantly off, it's going to preclude you from achieving product market fit. Say everything is great, but you have a poor user experience, it's going to get in the way and block people from realizing the value that you've got. Or if you're missing a key feature, that's going to prevent you from having it, right? Or if you have the wrong differentiator, or you're picking the wrong set of needs or problems to solve. So that's the idea. And once I created this, I realized, hey, I can create a process, a step-by-step process to guide people through forming, testing, and iterating these hypotheses. And that is just a lean product process. And all we do is we start at the bottom, step one. Now we have numbered steps. We start at the bottom and work our way up. Step one is who's our target customer. Step two is what are their underserved needs. Step three, what should our value proposition be? How are we going to be better or different than the competition? Step four, what should our MVP feature set be? What's the minimum set of features that we need to, go after in order to deliver that value proposition? And then what should the user experience be, right? And then when you work your way through steps 1 through 5 and you get to the UX, that user experience you create basically encapsulates all the decisions you've made getting to that point. And I'm a big fan of actually using prototypes to test before you do any building or coding at all, right? And so the lean product process just has a sixth step, which is, hey, we take that user experience that we created, whether it's a prototype, or it's a live product, and we test it with customers to see, we close the loop, if you will, to see how we're doing with product market fit. And this is meant to be an iterative process. Nobody crushes this the first time that they go through this, right? Not even the big companies. So that's the idea. Now, in today's talk, I don't have time to cover all 6 steps. I have talks online that cover each of the different steps that you can check out on my YouTube channel. I'll share the URL in a little bit. Again, you can get it from my website. But what I want to focus on is really step 2, which is identify and underserved customer needs, because this addresses those top 3 reasons why customers fail for the most part, right? And I mentioned earlier that with the top reason, and I believe this is the top reason why products fail, is because the team did not start out with a customer problem. They started out with a solution. And so, early in my career, I kind of became aware of this distinction between problem space and solution space. I'm curious how many people here have heard the term problem space before, but I'm going to define the two. And they're kind of separate but related. They're like two sides of the same coin, right? Problem space is basically a customer problem, need, or benefit that the product should address. Let's say I just felt like it's too hard to share photos with your friends. I want to make it easier to share photos with your friends. That statement is a problem space statement, right? I'm just getting really clear on the problem I want to solve. I want to make it easier to share photos with your friends. I didn't say how I was going to solve it. I didn't say, oh, I didn't say anything about how I'm going to solve it, right? And that's the idea, is we want to get clear on the problem before we jump to the solution. I'm sure a lot of people on the call today are familiar with the template for an agile user story. As a blank, I want a blank so I can blank. Like as a blank type of customer, I want to be able to do blank so I can blank, right? That last part, so I can, that's the essence of problem space. Like, why would a customer care about this? How is this going to create value for a customer, right? So this is problem space. In contrast, solution space is a specific implementation or design to address the need. If right after I said in the problem space, hey, I want to make it easier to share photos with your friends, the very next thing I said was, oh yeah, and last week I launched an app on the App Store that does that, that makes it easier to share photos with your friends. That app would be in the solution space. See, that's the difference. The kind of abstract idea of the problem you want to solve versus the actual tangible app. Or let's say I didn't do any coding, but my friend Sally is a designer, and she created a set of mock-ups or a Figma of an app that would make it easy to share photos with your friends. Those designs or mock-ups would be in the solution space, right? And that's the idea. And the top reason products fail is teams go rushing into solution space without really spending enough time thinking about the problem space, right? That's basically the top reason why products fail. And it's very pervasive. I hope after, so this is kind of a learned mindset, right? People aren't born with this kind of mindset, but especially product managers, it's really important to build this mindset up. And when you do build awareness up, you're going to start realizing that many of the conversations you're having are in the solution space, right? Stakeholders are asking you for specific solutions or features. Customers or clients are asking you for specific solutions or features, right? Your team members are, right? That's the idea. And I get it. Like, this is the default way. Solution space is the default way of how humans think, because we live in solution space, right? We live in solution space. And by the way, developers have to launch working code in the solution space. Designers have to create, pixel perfect designs in the solution space, right? So it begs the question, who on the team is really paying attention to the problem space? And it's really the product manager who's the main role, because as we just got done saying, designers and devs are mainly working in solution space. If you as a product manager are spending most or all of your time in solution space, then I would argue there's no one on the team who's spending time on problem space, right? So I like to illustrate this with a specific example to make it memorable. And that is when NASA was sending astronauts into space in the 1960s, they knew that the ballpoint pens that we use here on Earth wouldn't work because they rely on gravity for the ink to flow, right? And the first thing I need to say is, if you Google this, it'll say, oh, this is an urban legend. NASA didn't do this. NASA didn't spend the money. It's true. NASA didn't do it, and NASA didn't spend the money. But one of NASA's contractors on their own said, you know what? I think we can invent a pen that can write in zero gravity. And they went off and spent $1 million of R&D money in the 1960s, which was a lot, and they invented a space pen. And you can see one here. I have one, right? Somebody gave me one. And it writes, I haven't been in space to check it, but most pens, when you write upside down, they stop writing because eventually gravity, keeps the ink from flowing into the tip of the pen. This one keeps writing and writing and writing because it has a pressurized gas canister in there, right? So the Russians, they also had to send astronauts into space, and they also realized that they had this problem. But instead of inventing a $1 million space pen, they just gave their astronauts pencils. And you can actually buy a Russian space pen. It's a joke. It's just a pencil in a box, kind of poking fun at the expensive space pen, right? So why do I tell this story, right? At the end of the day, by the way, I know I'm a geek at heart. I know there are other requirements I'm not talking about. Like, I'm only talking about writing. Like, this thing can catch on fire and the lead tip can break off, and this doesn't have it, right? So I understand all that stuff. But sometimes we can over-engineer a solution, right? We can overscope a solution when something else could have got the job done, right? But the real reason I share this is, even when you're aware of problem space and solution space thinking is such a default and so pernicious that it will sneak in, right? It'll sneak in. So when the head of that company, his problem space was, hey, I think we can invent a pen that writes in space, he had some solution pollution in his problem space, right? I'm sure some people here on the call probably caught it, but he had the word pen in his requirements, right? So that's an example of what I call solution pollution. It would have been better if he just waved his hands and said a way to write in zero gravity. That would be less solutiony than saying a pen that writes in zero gravity, right? And so hopefully after today, you'll start realizing there's solution pollution all around. And the number one trick I have for you, we're not going to uh, shame somebody and say, oh, you just brought up a solution. Shame on you. What's the problem? Right? That's not going to work. What we do is we just say, hey, I hear you suggesting that we should build feature X. Can you just help me understand why would that be valuable to a customer? How would that help a customer? That's how you try to bridge the conversation from the solution space to the problem space. So hopefully that person can engage, and think about the problems. Sometimes you realize, sometimes they can name the problem. Not often. Sometimes they might not be able to name the problem. Sometimes they'll name a problem, but then you realize that solution doesn't solve that problem. I've seen it so many times. When you start that conversation, you pull the thread, you end up in a totally different place with a totally different solution than the one you thought was going to be the one that was going to solve everything, right? So that's the idea. And if we go back to the astronauts in space, a way to write in space is better than a pen that writes in space, right? We can do one better if we say, well, why do astronauts need a way to write in space anyway, right? And usually when I ask a live audience, people tell me things like, well, they need to take notes, they need to, document things and refer to them later. That's an even better description of the problem, right? Because it's a little subtle, but when you say what the goal is basically to capture or document information and refer to it later, it's subtle, but we've removed writing. And now you can maybe do some Sira Alexa thing, right? Alexa thing. In the 60s, it probably wouldn't have been feasible, but we're getting more to the essence of what the true need or problem is, right? And how does this look on real software teams, right? This is how it looks, right? Your Jira tickets and Trello items have, solution pollution. Add a drop down that does this, build a wizard that does this, right? Add an API call, add a menu, add a screen, add a table, right? These are all solutions. And the thing about Jira is it lets you have a proper user story or problem, and you can still have your kind of technical solution items there, right? By the way, the message is not don't ever think about solution space. Obviously, we're going to have to specify what we're going to build at some point. The point is make sure you spend enough time in the problem space. So with Jira, you can have a proper user story, and then you can use the subtasks to actually list out the actual solution tasks that you need to do. And the trick to creating a successful product and creating a lot of value is what I call peeling the onion. You start out with some initial description of the need. As you do discovery research and understand the problem space more, you're going to basically peel the onion and get deeper and deeper, deeper, right? To create a lot of value, you have to peel it several layers on the problem and on your customers as well. So I want to show you an example of that. In the United States, we have a product called TurboTax, which is from Intuit. In the US, every person has to basically prepare their own income taxes annually and file them with the government. Now you can pay someone else to do it for you, but over 50% of people do it on their own, and it's very complicated with a lot of weird rules that you wouldn't know and math and all. If this, then that. And you've got to get your receipts and all this stuff. So it's very complicated in the United States, right? So we could brainstorm like what are some of the problems it solves for people. Like it helps them prepare their taxes. You can get audited by the government. If you do stuff that looks risky, they might audit you, and that's not fun because you might get fined. It can help you check your return, right? These are examples of problem space benefits that it can do. And one of the things in the problem space is there's a little bit of order to it in the sense that while these three are distinct benefits, if I did that same kind of 5 whys approach that I was doing with the problem space, and I said, why is this valuable? Why is this valuable? It's kind of like being on a ladder. And the first answer I get from the customer is the lowest rung. Each time I ask why, I'm trying them to kind of go to a higher level benefit. And we might find that while these three are distinct, they all ladder up to the same overall benefit of empowerment and confidence. And the way that narrative might go is, hey, before TurboTax, I used to do my taxes by hand. It's very complicated. It took a long time. It's very nerve-wracking, very anxious. I probably was making mistakes. A friend recommended TurboTax. It held my hand. It guided me through the process. It felt a lot easier, and I felt a lot more confident in my taxes, right? That's frankly an emotional benefit. There's a whole separate benefit ladder. We call them benefit ladders of save time, right? It has nothing to do with confidence, just has to do with saving you time, whether it's saving time in how long it takes to prepare your taxes or in how much time it takes to file your taxes. And then finally, the third benefit ladder is save money, whether it's because it's helping you reduce your tax bill by finding things you can write off or because it's cheaper than hiring an accountant, right? So this is what I mean. This is what I mean by a problem space definition. This is the problem space definition for TurboTax. Each year, when the TurboTax team works on a new version of TurboTax, they're just trying to find additional ways to make you feel more confident about your taxes, save you more time with your taxes, and save you more money with your taxes. And there's plenty to be done each year. to improve how they're doing on those. Every once in a while, you add a whole new benefit ladder to your value proposition. That's a very exciting time. But usually there's plenty to be mined with your existing thing, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is your team should have an artifact like this. It can be a simple one pager, which lists out all the atomic benefits organized by the macro benefit umbrella ladders, basically, right? So we all know. And before we come up with a feature idea, we know which benefit it's going to actually address. And if you don't do that, you can end up with features that I call orphan features that nobody can tie it back to any customer problem or benefit, right? It's a feature that we built. All right, so if you follow my advice and you do this, you'll probably end up with, a lot of, again, peeling the onion. You might end up with more. Right now, I've only listed 6 benefits. You might peel the onion and have a lot more. The next question is, okay, how do we decide which of these problems is the biggest one to go after? Which one's going to create the most value for customers? So here we haven't made any judgments. We've just kind of tried to define all the things that we could do, right? Problems we could address. The next question is, okay, but some of these are probably not as good as other ones. There are better opportunities. So I tried a lot of different frameworks in my career to address this. And the one that works the best for me that I really like the most is importance versus satisfaction, to prioritize these opportunities and figure out which customer problems are going to create the most value and which ones are going to create less value. Okay. So let me explain the framework to you real quick. On the x-axis, on the y-axis is for whatever user need we're talking about, save time, save money, make me feel confident. How important is that user need to our target customer, right? Everything, if you go back to the pyramid, everything is a function of who your target customer is, right? And we can imagine it going from low to high. On the horizontal axis, we have however they're getting that need met today. This is in the context of like building a new product. You're looking for market opportunities. However they're getting that need met today, how satisfied are they with their current alternative? And again, you can imagine it going from low to high. And if you're thinking about, well, how would we get the data on these two things? You can think about it like a survey question, right? For importance, I tend to use a 5-point scale from not important to extremely important. You can think about it from 0% to 100%. And you just say, hey, when you're doing your taxes, how important is it to save time on, preparing your taxes? That's the idea, right? Oh, oh, sorry. One sec. Okay, cool. Great. My tab just changed there. Cool. And then on the satisfaction side, basically, we need a two-sided axis here. And so I like the 7-point scale where you basically, again, you say how satisfied are you with how you're getting need X met today? From extremely dissatisfied, people unhappy, all the way to extremely satisfied. Again, you can think about it as like 0 to 100, right? That's so you can imagine you can do a survey. You don't have to do a survey. You could, even when I do one-on-one discovery interviews, I will break out these scales just so I can have a more precise conversation with customers, right? If they say, well, that's kind of important, I want to be like, well, point to me on the scale because I want to compare the importance levels of different problems, right? And same thing with satisfaction. The other way you can think about it is forget any scales or anything like that or survey questions. It's just, hey, we're going to create low, medium, high, create a 3x3 grid. And with our team, we're going to kind of use our gut and judgment and place these things. Like you can imagine writing each user need on a Post-it note and with your team placing it, in one of these 9 quadrants. That's the idea. So let's talk about, I'm just going to divide it up into quadrants so we can talk about it, right? So if we divide it up into high, low, we've got in the bottom left here, we've got, what is this saying? This is saying whatever need we're talking about, evaluating, is low importance to our target customer, and however they're getting it met today is low satisfaction, right? Low. In this quadrant, bottom right quadrant, whatever need we're talking about is low importance, and however they're getting it met today, they have a high level of satisfaction with. Now, at the end of the day, we want to actually avoid these 2 quadrants. They're not worth going after with your team's precious time and resources. Why is that? Well, a general tenet is the higher the importance of the need that you're addressing, the more value it's going to create for customers. So, and nobody says, hey, let's go address a low importance need. Nobody does it on purpose. What happened? They started with a solution. They weren't even thinking about the need, or they thought about the problem, but they didn't run this importance versus satisfaction analysis, right? That's the idea. So we want to avoid ideas that are in this quadrant if we can, because you're just not going to create enough customer value. All right, let's move on to the next quadrant, the upper right quadrant here. Now we have high importance of user needs. So whatever need we're talking about is of high importance to customers, but we also have a high satisfaction with how they're getting it met today. So yes, it's an important need, but I've already found a solution that I'm pretty happy with. This is what I define as a competitive market, right? And the example I always think of here is like Google Internet Search. Let's practice our problem space skills here. And maybe if you want to type an answer in chat, you can. How would we describe the problem that Google Internet Search solves for people, right? Trying to stay in the problem space without the solution space. If anybody wants to type it in, feel free. I'll give it a second or two. If nobody types it in, then in the chat, there's a chat in the bottom right if you want, where everybody was saying where they were calling in from, if you want to. Otherwise, I'll move on. Okay. Going once. All right, cool. Well, usually when I do this in audiences, people say, find information or answer questions from, find an answer to questions that I have or find information I'm looking for online, something like that, right? So that's the problem, right? Now, the next thing I'd like to ask is, great, when you need to find a question, an answer to a question or find information online, how important is that usually? Right? Low, medium, or high. And when I ask live audiences, most people say high, right? Except for those midnight YouTube searches. Other than that, it's pretty high important stuff, right? So that's why. And then if I said, great, for Google Internet Search, how satisfied are you with it, right? Most people would say, I'm pretty satisfied, I'm high with high satisfaction rate. So that's why it would go up here, right? The problem that it addresses is high importance and it delivers high satisfaction. Now, I've been talking about the example for a few years, and there's actually something that might be providing even higher satisfaction these days, right? If you think about ChatGPT, how much are you doing fewer Google searches than you were because now you're doing stuff in ChatGPT and and Claude and Copilot and things like that, right? So it's an interesting thing to talk about. That's an example of a disruptive innovation. And I'm not saying you shouldn't enter this quadrant, but basically I would say this is the quadrant. You hear people say your product needs to be 10x better. This is where your product needs to be 10x better. You need to be crystal clear on how you're going to deliver like an order of magnitude improvement in performance, which requires a disruptive innovation like Gen AI is doing for internet search, right? Okay. And then last but not least, we have the upper left quadrant. We have high importance of user need, so that's good. And however they're getting met today, they have low satisfaction. That's where the big opportunities lie in this quadrant, right? People are telling you this is an important need, and I have not yet found a solution that I'm happy with, right? This is where opportunities live. If you take nothing else from my talk today, I've already covered the 2 main points that are going to increase your odds of being successful, which is 1, make sure you start with a problem, not a solution. And then 2, do a quick analysis with your team of each of those problems or needs on importance and satisfaction, and make sure you find at least one in the upper left quadrant, and that's the one that you focus on and go after. If you do those 2 things, you are set up to create a lot of customer value. Now it's just kind of a simple matter of execution, right? But we need to figure out the right features and the right UX, but you just set yourself up on a solid foundation to create customer value. Now, the example I always think of up here is Uber, right? So again, I'll ask the audience, if we had to describe what customer need or problem does Uber address, how would we describe that? Feel free to type in the chat if you want. We did get some answers on the Google one. It just took people a little bit of time there, but
Yeah, I think we'll probably have to just give it a minute.
yeah, it's all good. Okay, so Nitin said book a cab anytime. So part of the problem there is you put cab in there. So you put the solution in there, right? You don't want to, you did what the pen guy did. We don't want to do that. So we don't want to put a solution in there. We want convenience, and convenience is a little too vague. Okay, Vipin said commuting one point to another, something like that. Yeah, traveling from one point to another, right? Pratibha said take me from point A to point B with the driver, right? So yeah, I would say it's something like, take me where I need to go without me driving myself, because I can't drive myself for some reason, right? It's kind of, it's like a little nuance there. Cool. So great. Everyone's got that, right? Right. Everyone's got that. Cool. Ease of travel without worrying about driving yourself. Cool. That's the key. Is like, hey, get me where I need to go without me driving myself. Excellent. Now, when you need to be driven somewhere without you be driven somewhere, how important is that usually? Low, medium, high, right? So think about that in your head, low, medium, high. And I think for most people, it's high, right? It's like, hey, as I like to say, how important is it to get to the airport on time to catch your flight? Usually it's pretty high, right? So that's why the problem would be in high importance. And then before Uber came out, like what was the most common solution that people would use for being driven where they need to go? Right. So it was basically taxis, exactly. Several people said taxis here. Public transport, sure. Taxis, depending on your market, right? So if you want, but we're talking about like, just like you alone are going, it's kind of like on demand when you want to go kind of a thing, right? As opposed to public transportation, it's taxis. And then if I ask people, hey, how satisfied were you with taxis? And I ask people to ask low, medium, high. Usually when I ask people, we get low satisfaction. Now there's certain parts of the world like Manhattan, New York, and London, where it's like, it's essentially public transportation. You just go out there and there maybe the satisfaction is high, but in general it's low, right? So that's why I would put taxis up here, because again, remember the importance of the user need of being driven somewhere was high, but the satisfaction was low. So Uber's did a lot of things to be successful. Obviously they executed well, they have great operations, but I think one of the unspoken reasons why they've done so well is because they were looking at an upper left quadrant opportunity, right? It was really important for people to get driven around. Taxis weren't doing a great job. They had a monopoly on it. They didn't really care about customer service. And not everybody. Obviously, there's good taxi drivers out there, but for the most part, it wasn't that good. And then they come along and they address the same need using their new technology and deliver a much higher level of satisfaction, right? So that's how I explain part of why Uber was so successful. Okay, so we've got these four quadrants, right? And again, if you take nothing else away from my talk today, it's hey, start with the problem before you jump to features and solutions, and do a quick analysis here and try to find at least one problem that's in the upper left quadrant that you can go after. That's the idea. If they're down here, just forget about them. If it's up here, the other way to go is you can go up here and try to really have a disruptive innovation that's 10x better, but that's risky, right? It's riskier. Here, it's like a no-brainer. People are telling you they have a high need, high importance, and low satisfaction. So what I like about this framework is it's meant to be a visual framework, like a visually intuitive framework. So let's imagine that we had a product and we surveyed our users and said, hey, tell us how satisfied you are and tell us how important the need is that our product solves for you. And we averaged those, all the data we got, and we came up with an average satisfaction, average importance. We could plot our product as XY coordinates here, right? That would be our product plotted in this space. And if we did that, it would end up making a rectangle with the origin. And the idea is, hey, the bigger the rectangle your product creates, the more value your product creates. Basically, that's the idea, right? And if there's another product that represented by this green dot that addresses a higher importance need with a higher level of satisfaction, its rectangle is going to be that much bigger. It's creating that much more customer value. That's the idea, basically, right? The bigger the rectangle, the more value. Um, the other way to look at it, though, is, hey, okay, let's say the green product is the best product in the marketplace. How much room is there to do better than that product, right? Because they're not yet delivering 100% satisfaction. You can see they're not delivering 100% satisfaction. So if we say, gosh, what if they went to 100% satisfaction? If somebody was able to do that, there's another rectangle, which is the rectangle to the right, which the bigger that rectangle is, the more opportunity there is to create customer value from where the market leader is, basically, right? That's the idea. And if the green product was our product, one way to think about what we're trying to do is, hey, we're addressing this need. We're currently delivering this level of satisfaction. How do we deliver higher levels of satisfaction? By adding new features, fixing UX, fixing bugs, things like that, right? That's the idea. And if we take this to the extreme and we say, okay, where in this space is the biggest rectangle to the right, the biggest opportunity? It's basically the closer you are to that corner, the greater the opportunity. And just for a second, if we're gonna like write out the formula for that rectangle to the right, and I call it an opportunity score. It's basically the height of the rectangle, which is the importance, times the width of the rectangle, which is 1 minus the satisfaction. Now, in my book, this is as far as I've got. I like to do intuitive visualizations when I can. So I was very excited when a few years ago, I finally cracked the nut on how to visualize this thing. So you don't have to actually run the numbers or anything like that. When you run the numbers, you end up with this heat map, right? Where 1 is the highest opportunity score, the biggest opportunity, and 0, represented by the darkest blue, right, is the lowest opportunity. That's the idea, right? And the idea is, if you look at this, it basically reinforces our simple intuition from the quadrants. Remember the quadrants here? If we go back to this, right, things, this bottom half, bottom left, it's largely blue because it's low importance. The bottom right, it's definitely blue. It's even dark blue because it's high importance, low importance, and it's high satisfaction. The upper right quadrant, also blue, largely blue, because it's high satisfaction. The only real place to create significant customer value is in the upper left quadrant, right? And where we're now getting into greens, yellows, oranges, and reds. And the closer you are to that corner, the better. So how can you use this tool? Well, what you can do is you can write down the problems your team is thinking about solving on a Post-it note, and then you can just place the Post-it notes on this overlay And then you can just look at the color coding, right? You can either see which ones are closest to the corner, or you can just look at the color coding, right? So in this case, which one would be the biggest opportunity? Save money would be the biggest opportunity, followed by save time. This is like orange. You look at the middle of the post-it, orange, light blue, dark blue. That's right. And I have a template. I'll put the link in here too. If you want to, you can use it. I like providing templates to people when I can, where you can fill out post-it note, digital post-it notes. This is the Google slide deck, digital post-it notes, and you can move them around, and your team can use this to prioritize the opportunities that you're trying to do. All right. You can also, so that was in the context of looking for new opportunities. A lot of you probably have an existing product. Like, how can I use this for my existing product? You actually can use it for existing product too. So I'm shifting the context of what I'm saying, but you can think about it. By the way, everything I've said about the product level applies at the feature level. So say our product has a lot of features, we can say, great, how much customer value is each feature creating, right? And we can ask, how important is this feature and how satisfied are you with this feature? So I want to share real data from you from a real product. We had a lot of features in the product, but we had 13 that we were thinking about evaluating and improving. And we wanted to know how good a job are we doing on each one of these to focus on which one's going to create the most value for people if we fix it, right? So now we have numbers. Instead of low, medium, high, we have numbers going up to 100. Each of these 13 points or dots here is one of the 13 key features plotted with its average satisfaction and average importance. And the number to the right is just the satisfaction value, so you can read it more easily. As the PM on this product, the first thing that jumped out at me was this feature. Customers were telling us it was 100% importance, doesn't get any more important than that. And we were delivering 98% satisfaction, which is really, really good, right? I wouldn't look at that and go, gosh, we're missing 2 points. I'd be like, that's noise, that's rounding error, that's amazing. Like that feature pretty much has perfect feature market fit because that corner is perfect feature market fit. This corner is like the biggest opportunity, right? And we had a cloud of features here. We had this one here. But this feature up here was the one that was closest to that corner. It had high importance in the 80s, really low satisfaction in the 50s. So we used this framework to say, okay, out of all the features we could work on to improve, this is the one that's going to create the most customer value. So we talked to customers, we figured out what's wrong with it, we redesigned it, we relaunched it, and that's how we created the most value, right? Okay, I'm going to wrap up here quickly. The next thing I'm going to jump ahead to is once you've kind of got your problems, your value prop, your feature set, then you need to create a prototype, right? And basically the old school way of doing it, I like to, I would categorize the different artifacts you can create by fidelity and interactivity. The low fidelity, low interactivity is a hand sketch, right? Whether it's up by hand on paper or on Miro whiteboard or real whiteboard, right? And the team, it's a good way to start with what your UX is going to look like. The next artifact up will be clickable or tappable wireframes. I've been a long time fan of Balsamic. It's low fidelity. Usually wireframes are grayscale. They don't have color yet. We're not getting worried about color yet. You can test these with customers if you're missing, to see if you're missing some big key feature, if your flows are broken or something like that. But where most people spend most of their time testing is here with what Figma can produce, clickable mockups, tappable mockups. I run all kinds of user tests for my clients here. We get awesome feedback. And again, this is before we write a single line of code, right? We're just doing Figma and moving on. After you do waves of this and you get to the point where you've solved all the issues and people really love your Figmas and mockups, then you can very confidently say, great, let's go to live product now. Let's go build this thing, right? Because you've validated that thing. The last point I want to close out with is the fact that there's a new game in town now, a new capability that can change this whole flow, and that is vibe coding, right? Because a lot of times people see this and they go, yeah, Dan, I want to do this, but we don't have a designer, or I don't have a design resource on my team, or I don't have one handy right now, or we have an unfilled design head, right? And so a lot of times people want to do this lean process and validate, but they don't have the resource. Well, the cool thing with vibe coding is vibe coding now lets you jump straight to a high fidelity, high interactivity live prototype, right? That you can test with customers right away. So you can kind of skip all that other stuff and go right there without having to be a designer or without having to code, right? Obviously, if you know some about design, you know some about code, it's going to be easier and faster to iterate, but anybody can do it. So I view it as vibe coding is unblocked. Product teams that wanted to prototype and do rapid prototyping testing, but couldn't because they didn't have the design resources, they are now unblocked from doing it. It's really easy, right? And so I got involved. Again, I have a technical background. I learned a lot about design. So, last spring when Vibe Coding came out, I got involved. I jumped in with both feet. I love it. I've hosted hackathons, but I was surprised that there's so many tools available. Nobody had tried to make sense of all the tools. So I created a framework that I want to share with you guys that I call the vibe coding spectrum to make sense of all the different tools that are out there so you can find the one that might be the best fit for you. Now, the main the main dimension that matters is left to right is less technical to more technical for the tools, right? And there are 6 categories. I'm going to explain each of the categories. The leftmost category, it's not so much that these are less technical, it's more that these are basically meant for designers. They're designer friendly. I'm also going to share with you what's the UI. These are all browser based. And who's the target customer. So these really are optimized for designers. Not to say anybody else can't use it. Anybody can use any tool, but these have like Magic Patterns and Figma Make. These have support for like design systems, templates, importing, exporting from Figma, things like that, things that designers care about more than other people, right? So that's kind of the designer. So if you're a designer and you're like, I'm curious about it, I would recommend checking out Figma Make or Magic Patterns, basically. The next level up is Lovable, Bolt, and so on, right? And this is where they're still browser based, but this is where I think they're more PM centric, right? A PM that has an idea for a feature but doesn't have a designer can go into Lovable and just with some queries really produce a really decent looking featured prototype that you can test with customers, right? So that's where a lot of PMs start in this column. The next column up, while we're still staying browser based, these are a little more technical than this column. They're still kind of, I would call them PM-centric tools, Replit and V0 by Vercel. They just have more technical capabilities, more degrees of freedom. You might need to know a little bit more to get the most out of them, but that's the idea, right? That's the idea. The next category up is actually IDE extensions in our integrated development environment, which basically means Visual Studio Code extensions, right? GitHub Copilot is the most popular one because Microsoft has GitHub and they have Copilot, and so it's basically an extension you can put into Visual Studio Code. OpenAI has their Codex. There's some open source ones out there, Root Code and Klein. The latest additions here at the bottom, Gemini finally came out with Code Assist as a plugin, and Amazon Q from Amazon. They don't want to be missing this game. And now they're pink now because now we're getting to the more developer centric, right? And now you're actually using an IDE with one of these extensions. That's the idea. The next category up is actually a dedicated desktop app, which is the IDE itself, right? And Visual Studio Code, again, is kind of the most popular desktop app. These are all forks of Visual Studio Code. So the look and feel is going to be similar, but they decided to fork it and change the code. Cursor is the most popular here. Windsurf used to be more popular. They got acquired. Kiro is from Amazon. And Anti-Gravity, Google is kind of late to the game, but they're coming on strong with Anti-Gravity, right? So there are multiple options there. And then last but not least, the command line tools. I don't need no GUI. I just want to be on the command line terminal. I'm good to go, right? So Claude Code is the most popular. I'm sure if you haven't heard of Claude Code, you've been living under a rock, obviously. The idea there, it's command line. OpenAI has their own tool. Gemini has their own tool. Amazon has their own tool. And there is like another, a tool called Aider, not from the big guys, right? But at this point now, all the big guys, OpenAI, Gemini, Anthropic, have something in Cursor, right? Have something, it's interesting because Cursor's here, they've gone here, but they haven't gone here. So it's very interesting. So anyway, that's the idea. And the other thing is it's very common for people, say you do jump in a Lovable or Bolt, over time you might migrate to the right. You might say, let me try Replit out. And then after you try Replit, you might, let me try Cursor. You might migrate to the right, right? So that's the idea. So again, to close up, Lean Product Process, that vibe coding can really help with the steps 5, right? Step 5, getting that prototype created so you can test with customers. The speed of iteration that I've seen with vibe coding is very impressive. Now, even before you show it to customers, iterating within your team so everybody's on the same page is very powerful. All right, so to sum up, just a reminder, 80% of new products fail. Why? Make sure you start with problems, not solutions, and you'll be much more successful than that. Avoid solution pollution. Hopefully after today's talk, you're going to be much more aware of when people are proposing solutions and features. You can avoid that by asking, why would that be valuable? Try to bridge the conversation back to the problem space. Start out by creating your problem space definition. We saw the example from TurboTax. Do that for your product. And then comes in the prioritization of the opportunities. You want to run the importance versus satisfaction analysis, right? Try to find something that's in the upper left quadrant where the opportunities live, high importance, low satisfaction. work through the other steps of value prop and feature set, and then prototype and test your ideas. And vibe coding can help you do that much more quickly. I mentioned briefly that I have a community that I've been running for over 14 years now. It's called Lean Product Meetup, and I just want to share that with you guys. And we used to do it only in person, but with COVID, we did it virtually as well, and we record all our sessions. So anyway, if you're interested, you can go to that QR code. I also put the URL in the chat. And then with that, I just want to thank everybody for your time. We're going to open up the questions on the left side here. There's two QR codes. This is if you want to get a copy of my slides and you want to take a moment to share feedback. I love feedback. Like good product people. Here's all the links where you can find my website, my YouTube channel, which I have talks on the other topics that I didn't have time to talk about today. There's the meetup, and then on the right side we've got our Slido code. I'm going to open up Slido and see how we're doing. Yep, good. We got some questions. Awesome. So with that, why don't we turn it over to Q&A, and you have time to go in there and upvote. You can upvote things. Doesn't look like anybody's uploaded anything. So there's a little thumb. If something looks popular, you can upload it. So, okay. Somebody said, I'll take the first question here. Aisha, sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. Big fan of your work. My question is, if you had to build a product from scratch today, what would your first 7 days look like? That is a great question. I Since we're talking about a compressed time frame, I would bring up the idea of a design sprint. So there's a book called Sprint, right? There's a lot of overlap in what I recommend in that book. I do think it kind of skips some of the problem space stuff. What I would do is I would try to, with the pyramid, if we go back to the pyramid real quick, I would try to quickly with my team come up with a hypothesis around like 1 and 2, and I'd go out and do some discovery interviews with some people of who we thought those customers were to validate our problem space definition, right? And then I would say, cool, as a team, let's do steps 3 and 4, and then I would vibe code a prototype, and I would iterate internally till we were the point we were happy, and then I'd quickly go and show it to customers, basically, right? So that should all be feasible within 7 days. Obviously, actually, you can ask yourself, what's the limiting factor? Like, what is the rate limiting factor? It's probably tracking down customers and conducting the interviews is probably the rate. Now that the rate limiting factor before used to be prototyping. For the most, it's like, oh boy, we gotta wait for the designer to do the Figma and all this jazz. So that's kind of the rate limiting step. Perhaps people might think it's the discovery. I guess if you need to track down some users, right? But that can all be done in 7 days. So that's what I think. That's what I would answer for that question, basically. So hope that's helpful. That's what it would look like. But it basically be like the team trying to get through all 6 steps in 7 days, right? And so it might be like I do like half a day of noodling on this, trying to get some discovery interviews, half a day to a day noodling on this, day so on this, and then getting the interviews done as quickly as possible. So, okay, let's see. Anonymous asks, how can we identify or search for a problem? What are some ways for someone not very smart to develop problem identifying skills? That's a great question because, as it becomes easy to code anything, you ask yourself, why does one team succeed in another one? If they're both putting the same stuff in a Lovable, like what's the difference? If they're both using Lovable or Cursor or whatever, or Cloud Code, right? It really is a problem space intuition and insight. And it's that onion. It really is that onion that you have to peel, right? And so I take your question to mean like, well, how do I get started, Dan? If I don't really know? So part of it a lot of times is by being immersed in a space. If you're living in a space, then you have subject matter expertise and you know what the problems are in that space, right? That's one. The other one is kind of like, there's a fancy name for it with like ethnographic studies, which basically means like you watch users, you sit with users and you watch them, right? That's the idea. And so just like the lady that sat with the chimps and watched what they did, right? You could go and say, okay, we're trying to make accountants' life easier. It's cool. I'm going to shadow some accountants for a little bit, or I'm going to do discovery interviews with them and ask them about it, right? So discovery interviews and watching people are the main reasons to do it. You can also Google around, you can use AI tools to be like, hey, what are some opportunities? But you also see people complaining on Twitter or LinkedIn, oh, this product, or I can't find a good product. So you can see some signal out there from various channels like that. So, okay, let's see. Given these principles are new, what actually changes in an AI-driven world regarding principles? That is a great question, and I don't think the principles change. That's my point. The principles don't change, and I would argue that if vibe coding, makes, steps 4 and 5 really easy, then like it just makes the importance of steps 1, 2, and 3 that much, 1, 2, 3, and 6, right? But really 1, 2, and 3, that's the special sauce of why your product's gonna be better or different than the other ones, right? So the team that can come up with the best value prop, right, is gonna that before they plug it into the tools, AI driven tools, that's what's gonna win, basically, right? In my opinion. So okay, what else we got here? Okay, somebody said, great question. Important satisfaction does not take effort into account. That is totally true because, and I'm not trying to say you shouldn't do effort. We're going to do ROI, but ROI comes later. ROI comes in step 4 because what I'm proposing is, hey, before we even brainstorm features, we should be prioritizing the problems and specifying scope in the problem space. These 2 problems are worth going after, these other ones aren't. And then when you get to step 4, then you say, great, we've identified these 2 problems. Let's brainstorm all the feature ideas we have for each of those problems. And then now each of these feature ideas has an expected return and it has an expected effort or investment. And so we do an ROI analysis. I didn't have time to cover it today. It's in the book, it's in my other talks. So definitely, if you're like, where does effort come in? It comes in later once we transition from problem space to solution space.
I just want to say, uh, point this out again. Like, if you get a chance, read Dan's book. It's timeless. A lot of lessons from that book are still applicable even after all this time, and it's a great read and it's easy read as well.
And I'll just say, if you prefer audiobooks, be careful because there's 2 versions. There's one that I didn't narrate that has like 600 reviews. And there's one they finally let me narrate my own version about 2 years ago. And so that one only has a lot less reviews. They're both, will say author Dan Olsen, but pay attention to the narrator. And I would just guarantee you the one that I narrate is better and more compelling. And by the way, when I narrated it, I use that as a chance to update some of the tools because I was reading it, like, I'm not going to mention these old tools. I'm going to upgrade the tools when I mentioned it. So anyway, if you're an Audible fan, you can check it out.
Any final questions? Hugo, anything from you?
No, I think it was very informative, and thank you for joining us, Dan. It was super helpful, and we're getting a lot of comments in the chat, and people are excited.
Cool.
And we actually hit our user limit. We didn't realize we had a
I
user limit.
heard. Was it 200? Or what was
Yes,
the limit?
yes,
200,
yes.
I think
We'll
we
figure
should
that
have a
out for the next
calculator
session.
to find it next time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
will share out the recording afterwards for folks, and we
Cool.
will make this available for folks. So.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate it. I hope it was helpful. And yeah, this is kind of a quick overview of my overall methodology and hitting the major points. Again, if you want to dive deeper, I've got other talks on YouTube. So, and thanks again to Bragati and Hugo for organizing this and to Nagarro for sponsoring it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a great rest of your day.